to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott, and all the way from Denver, Colorado, we have beamed in Craig, who I'll introduce properly soon. We were just having a laugh about whether I should order some pizza or not. I'm a bit peckish, so I might do it anyway. You never know. Anyway, welcome. It's a live show, as you know. We're streaming on various platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. So join us on any one of those, or drop me a line on my mobile, which is 07506 319 745, +44 if you're doing that from outside of the UK. Drop off the first 0. All that will go up in the stream. Send us a WhatsApp, ask some questions. I think that's about it, really. That's all I need to do. That's great. Hello, Craig. I never asked you before the show. I'm going to guess this. Knippenberg?
Oh, you got it. The silent K, the old Germanic silent K. Yep, or the English. They're the ones that did that. The only time I've ever heard my name said with a K is when we've traveled in Germany. And then people say, Herr Knippenberg. But everywhere else, it's Knippenberg.
Great to have you on. Thanks for joining us all the way from Denver, which is a beautiful part of the world. I mean, it's Colorado, stunning. I love it to bits. How lucky are you to be living there?
Yeah, thank you very much. And we like to say 'tis a privilege to live in Colorado.
Yeah. I mean, it really is, folks. If you've not been, I mean, it's for people who don't know, Colorado, then you've got Nevada, then you've got California, and you've got Utah next to it. It's an extraordinary part of the world. I mean, it's mind-blowingly beautiful. Colorado itself is quite mountainous, and then you drop down to the sort of deserts and the sea, and just incredible. I mean, the whole thing. One of my favorite parts of the world, to be honest, is that area.
It is very much so.
Yeah.
I do love England, though.
Have you lived all your life there? Are you a Colorado boy born?
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and then which was lovely, very stable. I like to say it was supremely boring. So childhood was, the same rituals every week, very stable family, stable community, lots of German Lutherans or Catholics in our neighborhood. That's it. And it was sort of a 60s upbringing. You had a lot of free time, a lot of freedom to play, run the neighborhood, family dinner every night, and play ping pong with dad. And then from there, I went to Valparaiso University in Northern Indiana, which is a similar climate. Yeah. And I think that's where I learned a little bit more about diversity, and decided I wanted to grow some wings. And learn more about diversity in the whole world. I was the only guy in the Valparaiso University Feminist Club in 1980. I was the only guy. And I thought, I want to branch out and see more. And so then went to graduate school here in Colorado and have never gone back. I've stayed here since.
Yeah, and you also did a semester over here in the UK, didn't you?
I did at Cambridge, and it was a transfer program through Fitzwilliams, and it was amazing studying European art, history, geography. Had some just wonderful teachers, and 2 nights a week I pub tended with my best friend. We worked in a pub, so I learned how to pour a pint, and played on the pub.
That's code for I got my beer free.
I did. How did you know? Do they all do that to the Americans? We got 10 pounds a night, all the beer we could drink, and then we'd go out for curry at midnight. We'd go out to get curry. And that was our pay.
Proper British sort of experience. Well done.
It was offense.
You have a curry afterwards.
Yeah. And we were on the pub darts team too. So learned to play arrows and just loved it.
And then you trained as a social worker. Now I just need to explain to people in the UK, training as a social worker in America is very different to the training of social workers in the UK. In the UK, social work training is very specific around legislative duties.
Okay.
Around care management and managing services and referrals into. But although you have that aspect of training, I know
we do.
It's very different as well, that you can do what you've done, which is train more as a therapist than the interventionist, child protection, social worker. Everybody here thinks of a social worker. Like the only time you hear about social workers is when a child dies. Everybody thinks every social worker.
Yes, or there's abuse.
You know.
Right, Child Protective Services. And at the graduate school I was at, University of Denver, they had 3 tracks you could take. One was administrative, and that would also be policy, running social services, running these programs. Then they had the child protection route for people that want to do that. And then they had a clinical track, and I did the clinical track. And my license is actually licensed clinical social worker. So we have our own designation. We strictly do clinical work.
And so just for the purposes of this, people should understand that's a psychotherapy, effectively.
Right. Psychotherapy, psychology. We took a lot of psychology classes, done a lot of training in pharmacology, all sorts of things. And as I shared with you before the show,
interesting thing for me, Craig, and I should say to people, you might hear me and Craig talking over each other because we've got a slight time delay on the line. We're trying, I think, before the show to sort of pause between, but both of us are just like too excited about this stuff to really do that. So I think you'll just get us, you'll have to deal with it, folks. Don't worry about it. But one of the things that really interests me about the clinical training in social work that you do over in the States, I mean, it used to be much more like that in the UK. And it interests me because as a psychotherapist, I've always been interested in the stuff outside of the dyadic therapeutic relationship and the systems around people. And that's what you primarily focus on.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Well, so I'll give you an example. And I also did work in group therapy, and our specialty here at my practice is group therapy for kids and teens, social, emotional, behavioral development. But in traditional psychology, so let's say you're seeing someone individually, and they're 30 minutes late for their appointment. And then you might interpret that as they're resistant to therapy. That would be a classic sort of interpretation. The person's resisting the therapy and taking responsibility for it. Now, in a social work perspective, you might say, oh, that's right. You work at 7-Eleven, which is one of our fast food stores here, convenience stores, corporate owned around America. And you live 45 minutes away and you take the bus to get here, and you have 2 kids who are in daycare. And your manager said your substitute worker was going to be 30 minutes late, and you can't leave or you lose your job. Well, that's not resistance. That is a person who's determined, who still showed up for even 15 minutes. That's resiliency. That's determination. That's not resistance.
Totally agree. I totally agree. And also, I think the sort of clinical psychotherapy boundaries are more for the convenience of the therapist than anything else. It's because they need to pack people in one after another and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And because certainly in the US, this is true, the insurance companies said that everybody goes, a 50-minute hour, why? That's amazing. Why did you think of that? Well, it's because that's all the insurance companies would pay for was 50 minutes. So that's it.
But there is a practical part to it, which is, and sometimes I'll do like a 50-minute and then add on 25 if we want to do an hour and a half. But it's so I have time to go to the bathroom, do my notes, and get ready and check my email. I mean, you have to have some time to breathe.
The bathroom is the most important thing for me at my age. I'm telling you, it wasn't so important when I was in my 20s, but now.
Now. I'm hoping I can make it through the show.
Absolutely. I'll cover for you. Don't worry. If you need to go, I'll cover for you. We'll do something. I'll start singing or dancing or something like that. But it is that. I mean, that's a really great example, I think, before my dig about the profession. But it's a really great example of it depends how you're looking at things to understand the meaning of it.
Yeah.
And if you ascribe a meaning of this person's attacking the boundaries rather than this person's really struggling to get there, and then it's a very different way of interpreting that experience. And I remember sort of one of the very first therapists I ever worked with, because I was trained probably like you in quite a neoclassical model of psychodynamic thinking and endlessly thinking about boundaries and internal transference this and counter transference that, and sort of not moving and not breathing. But you know, one of my earliest, yeah, exactly, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've written novels about nothing. The meaning of nothing. This person didn't speak to me for 6 weeks, but there was a lot going on. What's that? Right, yeah, you know exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But my first therapist post training that I saw was very, very. I mean, it was very interesting for me because he was on call. He was part of the hospital trust that I was working in, and he was effectively the staff counsellor for the whole trust. So he was on call, and you could contact him at any point. And so he had a beeper, and like throughout the session, his beeper would go off. He'd pick up the phone, he'd talk to people, reassure them, "Yeah, don't worry about that. That's usual with the medication. It's okay." And I'd be sitting there going, "Don't know what to do with this." And we talked a lot about that, and we talked about the importance of reality. And of living in reality, and the importance of whatever happens in your therapy, you know, it has to fit with reality. It has to fit with lived experience of life. You can't create an alternative reality with somebody who's very kind and insightful. You're nodding away.
Well, I'm thinking because we spend so much of our time with kids, and I specialize in children. I see quite a few young teenage guys who are spending too much gaming, smoking a lot of pot, not launching, that sort of thing. But my sessions, we're typically playing board games and just have a riot. I mean, I laugh all day, just like laughing with you. I do that all day long with the kids. And we're playing Monopoly or Uno or something, and I'm very competitive with them. And then when it's my turn, then I kind of sneak in my questions, right? And they have to talk for a little bit, and then we play some more. And in our groups, we're very hands-on. We're playing kickball with the kids, you know, sword fighting with fun noodles. It's very active, very engaging. It tries to mirror real life, especially the groups. I mean, it's like being on the playground. At school. It's no different.
And so you're using these natural tools, play and relationship, in a way to enable the kids to grow and develop. Tell me something about, you know, how you got into working with kids and young people. So what was the draw into that?
When I was younger, so first of all, I like to do everything brain-based, and my book, Wired and Connected, is all the brain basis of basically your social brain. And one of the things I knew about myself, I didn't understand the brain.
Stop that. This is a radical term. I know what you mean by social brain, but most people don't. Most people think the brain is that thing inside your skull. You just introduced saying, no, that's not true at all. Tell us about the social brain, what that is.
Okay, but don't let me forget to get back to my history.
I'll bring you back. Don't worry, I'll bring you back.
Okay, so basically you can look at 4 areas of the brain that really make up who you are in your social functioning in life. Now, the first one, and I gave terms that I teach this to kids, kindergarten through 8th grade. So my very first lesson with kindergartners is I talk to them about what I call the president, or the prefrontal cortex. Absolutely. And I have the kids knock on their heads, and I say, behind that bone you're hitting is this part of your brain I like to call the president, because it's in charge of paying attention and impulse control, time management, the executive functions. So we know that children with better impulse control do better, generally speaking, socially, because they screen what they're going to say. They think before they say it. We know in averages, girls, if you have 2 X chromosomes, you're about the 80th percentile for using your president. Boys with 1 X chromosome, we're about 50th percentile, because the genetic material for the president is on the X chromosome. So as guys, we're kind of like, we got one blueprint, and whatever you got, that's it. And a fetus can actually pick 1 X over the other for females, or combine them. It's incredible. So we talk about the president, your self-control. Then I get into what I call the factory, which is your limbic system, which is here around your neck, which is where your emotions come from. And so that's all the various emotions. In English, I think we have around 300 different names for emotions. And then, you know, the Germans have things like Schadenfreude, and Hebrews have nakas. We don't have those in English, but great feelings. So I explain how the feeling system works and how kids have different temperaments. So may I share my tale with you?
Yes,
I designed a tale. Now it's based on Winnie the Pooh, and I wrote to Disney and asked if I could use it in my book. And they sent a very long letter back saying if I did, they would sue me. And so I had to change it in the book. But
thanks to me.
I think I can do it online with you. So we'll just pretend nobody else is listening. But one day, the Winnie the Pooh characters decide to go for a walk in the forest. And Winnie the Pooh wants to go first. Now, on a scale of 0 to 10, Winnie the Pooh's about an 8. He's a pretty happy chap, right? Pretty happy fellow. And he starts on the path and he trips over a rock and he falls down. And so his happiness drops a little bit. Now, being Winnie the Pooh, do you remember what he would say?
I don't. Remind me. I should know.
He'd say, "Oh, bother."
That's right.
Yeah, you're a Brit. You should know this. So,
I know. I'm like going, oh my God, shame.
I'm shaming therapist. Oh, I love it. We got, later, if we have time, we'll have to talk about parental shaming, which drives me nuts because parents have to be good enough.
I was looking around for my Winnie the Pooh book. That's what I was doing. I was going, because I've got a copy of Winnie the Pooh to take with me to see my boy.
Oh, cool.
With him. So a friend bought me this beautiful, this illustrated one, this huge.
Lovely.
I was sitting there going, I know this is going to answer this question.
So Winnie the Pooh, he stands up, he says, "Oh, bother," and he brushes himself off. And then he says, "But there might be honey in the tree." So he thinks of something positive and he pops back up, his happiness goes back up, and he goes on the rest of the journey. Now, Piglet comes next. Piglet's about a 6 on happiness, and little Piglet. And Piglet falls over the rock. And Piglet says, "Oh no, walks are dangerous. I could get hurt. I can't go on walks. There's got to be more rocks." So he's consumed with anxiety. So his happiness drops and he has to go back home, can't even finish the walk. And it takes him quite some time to recover from that. Next comes Eeyore. Eeyore's the rabbit. He's about a 4. He's pretty OCD, right? Likes things perfect. And Rabbit falls over the rocks and he says, "Stupid rock, you're not my friend." And he kicks it and tries to throw it. And the whole walk, he's consumed with anger. And every time he sees another rock, "You're not my friend either." And finally, he gets back to the end of the walk. He gets to his rabbit hole and he has some tea and he finally calms down until Tigger comes by. Then he's mad again. But that leaves us a couple more. Eeyore. So Eeyore's got melancholia, which is a great, I think that's an English word that came from England, I'm sure. Well, it's dysthymia now. But he's got melancholia and he falls over the rock and he says, "Even the rock doesn't want to be my friend." and so now he's even lower and he just moseys along with his head down. And every time he sees a rock, there's another rock that doesn't want to be my friend. And he gets to the end and Pooh's there. And Winnie the Pooh says, "But Eeyore, I'm your friend." And he goes up a little bit and he says, "Yes, but no one wants to be my friend." And he just can't get out of the angst and the dysthymia and the melancholy. Now that leaves us with Tigger. Tigger's about a 10. Tigger falls over the rock and he says, "That was great. I want to do it again." And he keeps doing it and doing it until he's bloody and bruised and it's getting dark. And he's like, "I got to go home. That's the best walk of my life." Right? And then finally that leaves us with, Owl. Now Owl, if you think about Owl, he would fall over the rock and he'd say, "That's highly interesting. I wonder how this rock came to be here. I think I shall study it and I'll take photos for a PowerPoint presentation for my friends this evening." So there's no emotions, right? He's very professorial, not emotional. And then he gives his lecture to the friends and they're all bored and yawning and he just keeps going on about that rock. So for kids, for all children, we all have our own temperament. We obviously have all the emotions, but during times of stress, you tend to go to whatever your temperament is. For myself, I always start with myself when I teach this to the kids, second graders, and they act it out. They love it. And I say, I'm pretty much Winnie the Pooh, always was. And I have a little bit of Piglet in me. Now, my Piglet got worse. So this is primarily genetic. Now, environment can change that. So I don't share this with the second graders, but older kids, I say, I was a first responder at Columbine High School back 21 years ago,
Wow.
mental health first responder. My office was a lockdown shelter for the kids fleeing the school. We were a half mile from the school. And my office was in a church, so we just packed kids in. One of the perpetrators, Dylan, was a member of the church. He'd been confirmed there. All his friends were there. It was brutal. And that changed my temperament. So I added Eeyore and went through a pretty significant bout of secondary trauma, depression. And it's never fully left me. I'm almost there. About a year ago, I had a buddy of mine make a stained glass window of a Columbine flower for me. It's hanging here in my office. Wow. And I felt like I was ready for that. But it still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. So you have to understand your temperament, your child's temperament, and also how quickly do they react, and can they stop their emotions and think about it. Now, I use a basketball analogy. I'll try to do it with football, in the English football, because I don't know how many players there are. There are like 9 or 12 players, I think. But let's say
11 aside, I think it is.
So let's say the one team, they've got the ball, they got a turnover, and there's 4 players coming down the field with the ball, and they only have maybe 2 or 1 defender back before the goalie. They get to the goalie, right? Now, the defender is the president. These are the emotions attacking. And this would be the formula for like a preschooler. So preschoolers have intense emotions. They're super fast, and they don't have much of a president. So they got one little small, slow guy named Bob, and he can barely stop them. And that's why here, at the grocery store here, the kids can go to the bakery and get a free cookie. And then when mom says no cookie, then the kid's throwing a bloody fit in the middle of the store, right? And statistically, preschoolers are the most violent age of humans. They commit more acts of aggression per hour than any other age. And if you remember your son, they are terrorists. They're just wild because they have no defense. Now, at around first grade, second grade, girls, by the way, are 1.5 to 2 years ahead in brain development over boys. But about first or second grade, now we've got 2 players who have the ball. They're coming down the field, the pitch, I think it's called. Or is that cricket?
That's fine. Pitch is fine. Field is fine.
Okay.
They're all fine.
And they have 2 defenders back, and they're pretty good defenders. So now the defense has a chance to slow them down, and all the brain has to do is slow the feelings down and set up the defense more. Then you can really set up your defense. So that's your elementary. It's about 2-on-2, and there's a good chance they can slow them down, steal the ball back, or keep them from scoring, right? Now, if the president can do that, if it can slow them down, it kicks them to an area of the brain on the right hemisphere, right below your president, and it's between your factory, your limbic system, and your president, and it's called the right orbital cortex. And the orbital cortex is where you can think about your feelings, and you can think, do I really need to be upset by this? So if somebody cuts me off in traffic today, I could get really mad. And I always like to drive fast. My dream was to be a race car driver when I was older. I don't think that's going to happen. But I could get really upset. I could put up a certain finger, honk the horn, whatever. Or I could, if I stop myself right then from doing that, then I can think to myself, well, am I in that big of a hurry? No. Maybe it's someone who's lost. Maybe it's an elderly person. Maybe I was in their blind spot. I think I'm just going to slow down and give them a break. Everyone's a child of God. And so then I can change my feelings. So that area of your brain actually can turn off your emotions or keep them on. So if I have lots of negatives stored in, and your orbital cortex stores self-messages, like things you think about yourself or people have said to you. For myself, I was dyslexic as a child. And in first grade, they put me into the turtle reading group. Well, I knew what that meant, right? Now, even though I was a Winnie the Pooh kind of kid, anytime we had to get our books out and read or do spelling, I would just get all upset. And then I had a good president, so they'd kick him down there, but there was all these negatives stored in there. I can't read. I'm the slowest reader in the class. The kids all notice that I'm on the lowest level book. Well, that just keeps your anxiety on. Now, if I had better thoughts, like I do now about reading, because my reading got better, I memorized enough words by 5th, 6th grade, I got faster. I'd love to read now. Actually read Harry Potter to my son 20 years ago. And you'll love this, because when the movie hadn't come out yet, and being dyslexic, I looked at that girl's name, Harry's friend. And I just looked at that, and my son was like 6, I think, at the time. And I said, Harry and Sue got on the train, because I had no idea. So
you would never be able to do that word.
Never.
Oh,
the first two episodes of books of Harry Potter, it was Sue. And then we saw the movie on his birthday, and it was Hermione. And then I'm like, okay, that's it. So now I have a lot more positive thoughts about reading, and that can combat and turn off negative emotions. As a kid, I didn't. And so kids with like ADHD who have poor presidents, they get 10 times the negative feedback a day at school compared to other kids. So there's a lot of negatives in there, right? Now, the fourth area of the brain that all gets put into this then is what's called your mirror. I call it the mirror, your mirror neuron system. Yeah. And the mirror neurons are how we understand how other people think and what they're sort of thinking, but what they feel. So when we look at someone, so I'll do this. Let's say, do you have a favorite football team?
Manchester United.
Okay. Oh, I've heard of them. They're a popular one here in the States. So let's say I'm looking at Noel, or Noel's watching the TV, and I'm a Manchester United fan. And there's a guy rips off a shot, and Noel's TV goes out for 2 seconds. And when the TV comes back on, I'm in the stands with Manchester United, and I'm going like this. Yeah. What just happened?
They scored. They won.
They scored. And the reason Noel knows that is he sees me doing it, and his mirror neurons go, okay, if my facial expression was like that, if I had my hands up in the air, I would feel vitriolic. Therefore, that man is feeling vitriolic, and he wears a Manchester United shirt, and we just scored and won the game. And it does it in like that, fractions of a second. So we're constantly mirroring others around us. And we're pretending basically that we're doing the same thing. Now, preschoolers will actually do the same thing. There's that game Simon Says, and they imitate others. As the brain matures, you do it sub-threshold. So you wouldn't have to be in your living room and go, oh, I guess they won. You could just see me do it, and you know that your team won.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, that's a beautiful summary of what are, generally
the social brain.
Yeah. Very complex processes. And sort of, if I summarize what I've heard, what you described is how we're born with capacities, and they can be enhanced or depressed depending on life experience.
Yes.
There's elements of our brain that respond very much to social cues. And so we can strengthen the brain through consciously working on it.
And you need others to for everything in life to survive. But also, if you think about emotions, so right now, when COVID is slowing down here in the States, we have 600,000 people that need to be buried. You've got delayed weddings. You've got everybody who's missed things, or you won't see your grandparents again. And children who have been traumatized and are anxious. They've been wearing masks, who didn't even get to go to school, like my daughter. You've got all these emotions, and they have to be processed communally. Me sitting in a room by myself, and I'm not opposed to journal. I love to journal. But at some point, I need to connect with others to talk about what I experienced. And so when I say to you, oh, no, you were telling me about your son, and you didn't see him some with COVID. Well, I didn't get to see my son for 4 months because he was studying for medical school. He was quarantined. I didn't get to see him. It was brutal. So all I needed to do was validate. We just validated each other. And so much healing comes from community support, of sharing with each other and processing. And that's also for joys, successes, right? Is we process it together. And our brains are wired for that. Our brains are clearly wired for empathy. which is
absolutely.
to feel what others feel and then do something about it.
It's extraordinary, this thing about mirror neurons, and I just want to sort of highlight it a bit because people may not understand just how magical it is. I think mirror neurons are absolutely magical. They are,
incredible.
it's like fairy dust stuff.
It
really
is.
So, like, literally, as I'm moving my hand like this, there are mirror neurons in your brain that are activated by that physical movement. So, your version of my hand is moving inside your head. And it's just bonkers to think that. It's absolutely insane to think that that's how intimately human beings are connected. And there's a lot of research, I don't know if you're au fait with this, but there's a lot of research showing that one of the reasons psychotherapy works is because of mirror neuron activation. So hopefully the therapist has more of their mirror neuron cells active, if you like, more of their neurological structures are active. And then in the patient, they become activated in them because the mirror neurons mirror what's happening in the brain of the therapist, and then that creates new processes, right?
Yeah. So I saw a kid the other day, and I said, you really blessed me in our last session, the hard things you shared with me about the loss of your father. And then I said, I knew your dad, and I know how proud he would be of you, just like I am. And you could see it light up in him. Like he was seeing my facial expressions of pride in the son, right? And I have a son, so I understand that. And he read it in me, and you could see him feel it in himself. It was just magnificent.
It's extraordinary stuff. I mean, I get it with my boy when I give him some genuine positive feedback. It's not made up stuff, but when I'm proud of him, I let him know I'm proud of him.
Right.
And it's like he purrs with it, when like a kitten, and he's like not quite sure what to do with these feelings, these amazing, wonderful things that are washing through him.
And they're washing through him. And back to the question of how I got into this as a profession. The first was that when I was a boy, first, second grade, everybody would always say, the adults would say, "Oh, you're so sensitive." Now, I didn't like it because I wanted to be rough, like my neighbor kid, David, who was a football player. He always ran with the ball. He'd run over everybody. And, he was a tough kid that didn't take any guff from anybody in the neighborhood. And I was like, I don't want to be sensitive. This is terrible. It's a curse, right? Well, I had a good mirror neuron system. So mine, and we're all on a scale. And on statistical averages, females are about 76th to 8th percentile using the mirror neurons. Us guys are about 50th. And then you get your engineering type guys or women. And then autism spectrum disorder would be sort of 10th percentile or lower, right? Well, I'm probably in the 95th percentile. I did the eye test once, and I think I missed 3 out of 400. I was born that way. So I always had this sensitivity and empathy for others. And originally I wanted to be a pediatrician to help kids. And I had a younger brother that I played with all the time and his friends. And so I was really good at working with kids. I started teaching Sunday school to first graders when I was in like 6th grade because I got made fun of when I was trying to read out of the Bible at the middle school class in 7th grade. So I decided I'm going to go help the little kids. Screw this. So I loved working with children. And then, as I explained to you before the show, my junior year of college, I was grinding cheese at the pizzeria, and my thumb got caught in the cheese grinder. And I realized, man, blood, bone, fat. Oh, that was it. I'm like, there is no way I'm ever going to do this. That's gone. The pediatrician thing's gone.
Wow. I told you I'm like completely insane. I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation, this whole thing about men and women, and you and I know that the whole thing about gender is it's on a spectrum anyway, and some men are more women than men, some women are more men.
Right.
And that's the way it is. I don't know why people get hot under the collar about it. It's just the way it is. And I was always the sensitive kid, and I could tune into things, and I can still do it and stuff like that. Like you, I'm like very sensitive to blood and gore and things like that. But like to the point where I can't get needles. So having the vaccination, I had to go and tell them, you'll see me go pale and white, but don't worry, it's not deathly. I'm just sensitive. And then we'd have the medical staff there waiting.
Yeah, they're waiting for you to hit the deck.
It's like, I'm totally embarrassed going, no, it's just an emotional, I'm just an emotional guy. It's all right, don't worry. But they'd stick the needle in and I'd go blank and I'd go, ooh, like that. And they'd think, do we need an ambulance? No, it's just an emotional reaction. I'll go right now. And, classic stuff.
That's great.
And then so you had this interest in, there's something interesting, I think. There's a couple of things there that really interest me. One is the helping others to deal with conflict in yourself, but also the spiritual stuff.
Yes.
You were brought up in quite a spiritual, probably religious way. I mean, we're sort of mostly secular in the UK, but I think this it's an interesting aspect of things.
So we're a secular practice, and I think now America for the first time went below 50% religious people.
Really?
I think it's 49% now, first time, in terms of people that actually, go to church and stuff like that.
That's extraordinary.
But I grew up in the church. We, every Sunday we did the same thing every Sunday, and it was the other thing that was fabulous for me was having a family therapist for a teacher in college, because when I grew up, there was two ways of looking at things. You were either following Jesus or doing it the right way, or you were sinning. There was no thought about unconscious motives. We never thought that way. It was a very basic upbringing. And in the second class I had with this family therapist, he said, how many of you sat in the same seat you sat in the first class?
Yeah, exactly.
And 80% of us, 90% raised their hands. And he said, well, why is that? And we started brainstorming. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever thought about why people do what they do. I just thought you were either sinning or you were doing what you're supposed to do. That's it. It was a very basic upbringing.
That is actually what happens in these very black and white explanations of life. And I get it because I've been brought up in the Irish Catholic tradition. So, so I can really relate to what you're talking about there. Very simplistic, good, bad, black, white, right, wrong. All
right. And then guilt, lots of guilt and shame. And there are functions for that for humans, but it was a little on the heavy side. And Lutherans are very close to the Catholics. Very similar.
But there's another aspect, isn't there? Apart from the social control stuff, there's and we were talking about this before the show, there's another important psychological aspect, because you are a pastor now, aren't you? And you're sort of you're that's an important part of you. But the important aspect is this thing about meaning and purpose, right?
Oh, so I love I have a Master of Divinity as well. I've never been ordained. But one of the things that I've always loved is when I knew that I was going to be a pediatrician, I had to figure out what my call was. And we used to talk all the time. The adults would tell you, what's your call? And that meant, what was God calling you to do in this world to help? And whether you call that from God or from, one patient I might be talking about God, another patient I might be talking about string theory and the great harmony of the universe and how we're here to help each other get in the harmony of the string. It's different words that I might use with somebody else. And it might be a Buddhist. I can talk to Buddhists. I went to Noel Institute in Boulder, Colorado for a year and studied Buddhism and Eastern psychology and loved it. And I work with a lot of Jewish families. But it's that concept of why am I here? Why do I exist? What's my purpose? Or when you have that existential crisis and you've done something you didn't think you were capable of doing, either positive or negative. And the negative ones tend to throw us in those crises.
And one of the things is that sort of mechanism you had as a kid that you somehow stumbled onto, that one of the things that can give us meaning and purpose is helping others.
Right.
Yes. And that really plays into our social nature, I think.
It does. And it helps us. Humans survive in community. That was the great evolution of the human brain. So our ancestors, it was more family oriented. Just you and your family, and then it became your community, the tribal piece, countries, and at some point we have to switch to the whole world. We have to get away from different political parties, different countries. We really have to deal with the whole world on an empathetic level, with everyone working together. In Colorado right now, we've got cloudy skies here from forest fires up in the mountains. And it's blistering hot, and it just continues to get worse and worse, and we
My,
have to evolve.
actually, my hope is one piece of learning from the pandemic is that we're one planet.
That's what you hope.
that-
Yeah. You really hope, and that people come together and share the research, share medications, share our knowledge of this, and tackle
I think
reasons
that
why
is
it's
happening,
happening.
and
It is.
without getting political, I think
Yeah.
one of the, I don't know where you stand politically, but I'm talking about value systems here.
Yeah,
I
right.
think one of the things that happened during the pandemic was the election in the US rejected a value system that the rest of us thought were quite odd, which was individualistic and nationalistic. And now there's a value system in which is more about community and international and connection.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, it's not personalities, it's just value systems. There was a value system I found very odd, and now there's a value system I can relate to as a human being.
Yeah. And I think, I just blanked one. This is the hard part of getting older. Is basically all people in the world have the same mirror neuron system.
Exactly.
Now, how they choose to live that with their government structure, their whatever, how they want to live that, it can vary. But or how they think it's best done.
Yeah, without getting into it too much, I'm guessing that the person who was the president before, that they would be along that spectrum where smaller amounts of mirror neurons are working for that person, and not so much of them, and it's that sort of thing, I think, which is going on. That sort of psychological insight, I think, is important. That we need to have that. I mean, I'm not comfortable with the throwing out diagnoses on people. Oh, that person is a narcissist. Right.
But then you said that in a very dignified way. Some people's mirror neuron systems work better than others.
And that's the way it is, and that's okay.
It's true. It is. But
it's just reality.
At the end of the day, we all have that same system, and can we capitalize it? And can you raise children to be more empathetic? One of the issues here in America, and I don't know what it's like in Britain, and we have a very British educational system. So going to Cambridge was no different than going to university here. Although it was incredible and the buildings are amazing, but
they're all facades. As you know, it's all facade over there.
It's all facade. But it's younger too. We don't have buildings that are 800 years old that we're studying.
I know. We have gravestones that are older than America. Lots of them.
I got to tell you a quick Cambridge story. I was at Christ College, walked into the grounds, and they had that beautiful courtyard. And the groundskeeper was there. And I said to him, I'm an 20-year-old American, loud and obnoxious. And I asked him, I said, how did you get a lawn like that? And he said, well, you seed it, you roll it, you tap it, and you do that for 800 years, and it looks like this.
How many times has he said that?
I was hoping like a seed recipe or something that I could use at home right away. But back to schooling. So one of the stresses here is this parental obsession with getting their kids into Stanford, Harvard, the elite schools. And there is so much. So the teen suicide rate in the US was highest ever in 2019, before the pandemic. And the two main causes everybody's talking about is academic stress, all the pressure on these kids, and social media, comparing themselves to each other all the time and always feeling like they're not good enough, or everything's a competition. You have to get a better score than that other kid. Well, that doesn't really fit with our empathy system. That's more of a narcissistic, individualized, I have to succeed at the cost of you. So if I'm going to do well, you got to do worse than me. And the kids are under so much pressure. And it's finally, and now with COVID, that's getting more and more attention. People are looking at it, wait a minute, what are we doing to our kids? Now, hopefully it'll change. Children's Hospital in Colorado 2 weeks ago declared a statewide mental health emergency. There are so many teens that are being hospitalized for suicide attempts, and they don't have a room to put them. They're putting them in regular medical units because there's no space in the mental health unit.
So we were talking about this before the show, because one of the things that I'm interested in your model, and is that you very much hold on to this idea that treatment has to be realistic and cited within people's real experience of the world. So you're a non-residential project
Right.
in a country that has elevated residential treatment to the status of God. I mean, in America, everything is residential, isn't it? It's like these incredibly expensive hospital treatments. But you've held on to a model of practice. Yeah, I know it's all about money. I mean, it's absolute. It annoys me.
It is. And we're very much into not only seeing the kids here, but integrating that into the schools. And I consult for a school. So I do therapy at a school, independent school. I teach classes. And the research years ago out of Canada showed that treatment at school is 5 times more effective than outpatient.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when kids are coming to see us here in my outpatient office, we're on the phone to the teachers immediately. We integrate it with what's going on at school. I have psychologists that will go meet with the teacher to talk about a behavior plan. We integrate it with the parents and the family, and I do parent lectures. We have a lot of parent lectures we do. So we try to integrate it as much as possible.
Generally, I refuse to work with children on their own. I'll only work with the system because otherwise what happens is the child is scapegoated for systemic problems. And that's not, I don't mean that parents are nasty or teachers are nasty. It's just that because we're social, if somebody that we're close to emotionally has a chronic problem, it affects all of us. That's just a fact.
Yeah,
and we
does.
have to take that fact on,
Yeah, it does. And so I usually do a hybrid model where, unless it's clearly a family systems issue only, then I'll just do family. We do work with a lot of kids with special needs. So if a kid has Tourette syndrome,
I get
that's a tough one to deal with. And as a parent, right? And so then I'll meet with the kid 2 or 3 times individually or in a group. Then I meet with the parents and the kid. And I do a lot of parenting coaching because it's brain damage. Now, one of my favorite things, so I don't know if you knew this, I didn't mention it. I started a podcast over COVID, did it on Facebook Live for about 7 months. And then we switched it to a new podcast, which came out about 8 weeks ago. And it's called Legit Parenting, Legit, parenting. And it's strategies for actual imperfect parents to build resilient families. That's what it's about. So here's what I was saying. This is what my normal advice to parents is. So let's say you come in and you've got a neurotypical kid, and he's having some problems, picking up his stuff, and not tidying up after himself in the house. And I might say to you, you're supposed to be consistent. So we know parental consistency. Inconsistent parents are the number one driver of child misbehavior in general, just overall. And so we're supposed to be consistent. Now, I only expect you to be consistent 80% of the time. That's good enough as a parent. Because if you're consistent 100% of the time, you'll put yourself over the edge and you'll put your kids over the edge. And there is no research that Tiger Mom works. You cannot design a kid to be something they're not going to be.
That's right.
Parenting doesn't matter.
There's plenty of research that proves it doesn't.
So this is the opposite of Tiger Mom. And so I'm going to say to you, well, no, look, 80% of the time, if your kid leaves his shoes out in the room and he's in there on his gaming system in the bedroom, you go say, honey, get your butt in here, pick these shoes up and take them to your room right now immediately. But there's sometimes when you're tired and you've worked hard all day and you're beat and you're not up for an argument, especially if it's a teenager or a preschooler, and you're like, I'm just going to pick him up and myself and throw him at his door and go to bed. That's good enough. You don't have to do it all the time. And then I'd like to say, well, 80% for parents, unless you have a preschooler or a teenager, and then you're shooting for 65%. And that's good enough. Now, when COVID hit, then I switched it and I said, well, with COVID, I'm going to say for the average family, 65% is good enough.
Yes.
And if you have a preschooler or a teenager right now at home during COVID, 51%. You only need to be 1% past good enough. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was brain damaging. It was just, and I lived with our teenage daughter for months and months on end because her school didn't go back in. And when it first started, when we got sheltered in place, and she was 14 at the time, and when we all thought it was going to be 2 weeks, and she looked at my wife and I, and she said, "Oh, great! I got to be stuck with you two for the next 2 weeks." And she rolled her eyes, right? Now, my wife and I are like, yeah, we understand what you're feeling because we're mirroring that, baby. We get it.
We don't want to do this.
Well, then it just wouldn't end. And I like to tell parents, people weren't meant to live this much together. Families never lived this way in history. You were out working in the fields, collecting berries. You weren't all just stuck in a house together.
I remember I don't know if this happened in the US, but right at the beginning of the first lockdown, March last year, the schools shut, which was quite a shocking experience, because schools are so integral to the healthy development of kids, which is why things like school shootings just are awful. I mean, it just breaks my heart. We've only had really one in the UK, and we had gun laws brought in immediately after it, and quite right too. But that's another conversation. I'm not going to get into that. But schools, as in a war zone, for example, the first thing to open up are schools, because that's what the charities do. They'll get the schools going, and that's what will help the children heal and normalize and get well. Just get them back into school. You don't need to do complex therapy. You just get them with their peers.
They need to be in a routine, structure, have teachers and be with kids.
It's the complex social groupings as well, isn't it? Because
it is.
They get the neurological stimulation.
But the other piece, and this was so hard with COVID, kids need to touch. They learn through touching each other, playing, wrestling, horsing around, doing each other hair, right? And when the school I'm at, where I consult, they went back right away at the start in the fall. It was social distancing and masks and all this. And I had this first grade boy had to come see me because he got in trouble for swinging a big stick at some of the other boys. So I asked him, I said, why were you swinging this big stick? And he said, well, we can't touch each other. So us boys have been playing tag with little sticks. And I saw this big one, and I thought I could really help my team with the bigger stick. And I was like, well, that's brilliant. That is really smart.
Wow.
But we can't do that at school. And he said, I understand. I shouldn't have done that. I said, that's good. I said, now, what if you think about doing that again? And then he said, the most heartbreaking thing, he said, well, I haven't done it again because now at playground, I run around with my arms across myself so I won't touch anybody.
Oh, no.
And I was like, you poor child. Just
brutal.
Awful. And back to the war analogy, the thing with teenagers is so hard. So that teen brain, the quick formula, teen brains have half the impulse control as children and adults. So their president slides way down.
As much as that.
They have double the emotion, if twice as much emotion. So think about the fact.
Only double.
And like triple the nonverbal. So they're obsessed with social interactions and reading others and being left on, being part of a group. And so when there was crisis, that brain was designed to go out and fight. We got to hit the shores of France, right? We go across from, the Isle of Wight, the White Cliffs. And I've been to the Isle of Wight, actually. I saw the U.S. hockey team beat the Russians in 1980 in a pub in the Isle of Wight. Yeah, they bought it. They held us up and bought us beers. Anyway, so those soldiers, and the women who were there and nursing, they're action oriented. They were supposed to take over the world, fall in love, and fight for your country.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we told our teenagers, oh, honey, by the way you're going to fight this is to stay at home with us, not see your friends, don't fall in love, and wear a mask. Well, that is antithetical to their brain development. That's not what they're supposed to be doing.
But interestingly, and it's interesting, if you think about this, put it in this context so people get it. Imagine a teenager, one teenager in non-COVID times, but there's a teenager that goes home, never goes out, never talks to people and wears a mask all the time. You'd actually be thinking, oh, they've got a really serious problem.
Yes, yes.
But we were telling people, do this behavior that in normal times we would mean, oh,
absurd.
Warning signal.
It's totally unnatural. And I think part of the grief that we're all going through and the trauma is that this was not only a once in 100-year event, but it was so unnatural the way we had to fight it. Yeah. And then on top, in this country at least, the politics of it all, getting it politicized was just...
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad, isn't it, that happened. But we're over that. I mean, I think that we're into saner, more humane times.
I think so.
There are some countries still that are ravaged. You know, Brazil comes to mind. It's awful.
Yeah, right.
What's
Yeah.
happening there? Dreadful, sort of horrible stuff. 2,000 babies have died in the last 2 weeks from COVID. It's like it's unbearable to think about it. But there is then a move, and it happened at G7. And again, I think this is the frontal lobe systems in action in a healthy way. Saying, right, no, let's get vaccines out there. Let's take responsibility for this. You know, we can't beat this unless we all work together. And, you know, it'll happen, I believe. I believe it will happen. It'll be patchy, but
it is. Unfortunately for us, and it's probably worldwide, the group that doesn't want to get is the lowest vaccine rates are the late teens and young adults. And part of their brain development is this feeling of, you know, they're risk takers. They don't really stop to think what will happen to me. They don't believe it will happen to them. So they think they're sort of immune. And if you think about it, it makes sense for survival, because if we were living here in Colorado hundreds of years ago and I said, you know, no, we got to go get that buffalo or bison. They're huge animals. And if I didn't go, yeah, let's go for it, we weren't going to get it. And if I sat there and said, well, you don't know, let's think about it. We could get hurt. Maybe we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And then we're going to start thinking, oh, yeah, you could get gored. So could I. Well, we're not going to eat. So you need people to be risk takers.
So it is important that we have these different aspects of both ourselves. You know, we need the eel, we need the owl, we need etc.
We need them. We need everybody,
culturally and socially, and that's your point about diversity, isn't it? It's in that diversity that we get that strength.
Right, and every biologist knows that when a species lacks diversity, it ceases to exist. We have to have diversity in this world, and different talents and abilities.
These cultural and political conversations about binary nature of humans is so bizarre, because it's nonsense biologically.
Right.
We died out eons ago if that was the truth. Do you know what I mean? It's just, as you know, it's complete nonsense. We are, though, unfortunately, at the end of the show, Craig.
We've run out of tea and scones, I guess.
Oh, no, never that. Good Lord. Not even a pandemic would do that, young man.
You Brits, carry on with your tea and scones.
Absolutely not. We have our own special factories for that. The whole world can go to, but no tea and scones. Craig, it's been awesome to talk to you.
It's been lovely talking with you.
Hopefully,
I promised my daughter we would come to London after COVID got over.
You come see me. I live in London. I'm going to show you around.
I'd love to, and I'd love to have you on my show as well.
I'd love to.
Really fun.
Sort that out. It's so cool.
I'll send you a book. And one last thing I got to share with the audience. When I was there in 1980, I saw the Queen Mum drive by when I was in London.
Good for you.
And it was like, wow, she's awesome.
Go like that. You're right, Craig.
But everybody was like, wow, it's the Queen Mum. They're like, oh, that's cool. I got to see the Queen Mum.
Hello, Queenie. I'm good mates with the Royals, as you can tell. That mean the Royals. If people want to get hold of you, what's your website, etc., etc.?
The easiest way to find it is welistentokids.com. welistentokids.com. You can also go to CraigKnippenberg.com if you can spell it.
Yeah, but that's more complicated. WeListenToKids.com. That's wonderful.
And legit parenting. Where legit parenting is on Apple and Spotify. It's just legit parenting with my name.
Fantastic. Legit parenting. And again, we'll put all the links so that when this goes out, so that people can you get hold of it. It's been such a joy. You stay there.
I've just had a blast.
Yeah. So, folks, it's just incredible. You know, one of the gifts of the pandemic, and I don't want to be trite about this. It's been awful, the pandemic, but one of the gifts is that it got us all on Zoom. And so I get to meet people like Craig, who there's no chance, really, I'd have stumbled onto you if in normal times. So it's a real gift, these connections that are forming. Beautiful to hear the work that you're doing. It really makes my heart swell, fantastic stuff that you're doing over there. We're going to say goodbye for now, folks, and I will catch everybody next week when I've got a guest on. Don't know who it is. It's somebody, but you know, we'll see who it is at that point. I hope you all have a great week in the meantime. So bye bye.